underground studio hidden underneath a chip shop in Mullingar in Westmeath in the Midlands of Ireland. So don't try finding us. You won't. Although I've already said it's a chip shop in Mullingar. Coming up in today's show, we'll be speaking to a legendary journalist, Tony Evans, about the state of modern journalism, mainstream media, and his novel that he wrote that he's just sending out there for free. It's called Collusion, and it's really good. We'll talk more about that. Tony's here sitting beside me, but he has to stay quiet because he's just not in shot. So sorry about that, Tony. It's the worst place to be, the quiet guy. Our chief reporter Philip O'Connor caught up with Senator Tom Clone this week to talk about the debate on Ireland's neutrality and the triple lock. We'll play that clip, a clip of the conversation. There's a longer conversation that will be available as a podcast, and we will discuss that. I'll also explain to people who don't know, because obviously I had to learn what the triple lock is, even though I voted in the Nice Treaty. We'll also be digging into Europe's increased defence spending and asking the big question, are we being nudged towards global conflict? It feels very much like that. And of course, we will be rounding off the hour with our favourite segment, Dick of the Week. Always. Every week, many people to choose from for Dick of the Week with all this warmongering that's going on. Before we dive in, remember, we want to hear from you. Follow us on X at mothnews_ and Instagram at moth_news. If there's something you think we should investigate, drop us a message. Let's get into it. Right, let's start with Ireland's neutrality and the triple lock debate. What is the triple lock? So the triple lock came into being in 2001 after the defeat of the Nice referendum. If you're Irish, you'll remember that we voted on in the Nice referendum, and the government came back and said, no, you got it wrong. You need to vote yes. And we said, well, you need to change some of these things. So they did. They changed a few things, including this post hoc examination of, the post hoc examination of the loss identified the public's concern. So just bear this in mind. The public's concern that the treaty to expand the EU would erode Irish neutrality and lead to compulsory participation in a future European army. So think about the triple lock and think about our neutrality. And the reason we voted no for the expansion of Europe and for us to stay involved in that was because, and this is something that they really wanted to do, they really wanted to expand Europe. The reason we said no was because we wanted to maintain our neutrality. So they came up with this triple lock thing. Now, is it working? There's two sides to the debate. And, as with everything, nothing is black and white. There's a grey area here which we will discuss. So the triple lock requires three things to happen before Irish troops can be sent overseas. We are a peacekeeping nation. That's the point as well. So our troops go to keep the peace. So the three things they need is 1, government approval, 2, Dáil approval, and 3, a UN Security Council mandate. Now, that's kind of where the problem, why we have a problem. So Defence Minister Simon Harris wants to scrap the UN veto. So he argues that Ireland shouldn't need Russia's approval to deploy peacekeeping troops. Russia has used this veto to prevent peacekeeping missions being deployed in Macedonia in 2002 and Georgia in 2009. And then we have the critics, Sinn Féin, including Sinn Féin, say that it's a step towards NATO and eroding Ireland's military neutrality. So Simon Harris, in fairness, is going, well, we can't send peacekeeping troops to, say, for instance, if they need them in Russia. And we weren't able to in Macedonia and Georgia, and it's because Russia are using this veto. And we need to somehow manage to get rid of that. And as I said, there's two sides to it, but there doesn't always have to be two sides. Like the Nice Treaty, maybe we just need to change some elements of what that triple lock is. So that's that. Meanwhile, former Defence Forces Chief of Staff Mark Mellett, he was on Primetime, says Irish neutrality is a myth, doesn't exist at all, and that we need closer military ties with Britain and France. Doesn't sit comfortably with me. He says to date there's been a reluctance in Ireland to develop our defence capabilities in partnership with other states because of our interpretation of being military non-aligned. No. There's a reluctance because we're neutral. I think. I really don't know why this man is talking in such a fashion. We want to remain neutral. That's why we're reluctant to join with other countries to boost, to spend more money on defence. He says, I don't believe we're a neutral state. We are military non-aligned. And while defence remains a sovereign competence, that doesn't mean that you don't collaborate and work with partners in terms of how you develop your capabilities. You cannot develop military capabilities in a silo. He said, well, we just prefer just not to develop them at all. Like, I mean, there's a bang of warmongering off this. There's a bang of like who is pushing this? it's just a bit worrying. Um, he was on prime time and he talked about Ireland's security and defence capabilities. It was his first television interview since retirement. So he's calling for closer bilateral cooperation between the Irish Defence Forces and others, such as British and French. We had some dealings with the British Army back in the day. We'll talk to Tony, who's still sitting here quietly, about that and collusion, possibly. So, I mean, are we military non-aligned or are we just in denial? We're not in denial. We're military non-aligned. Thank you very much. Also, we'll stay with war for now. After Trump's NATO warnings, EU leaders are scrambling to boost defence budgets and ensure Europe's security. I just hate this. It's like Reagan, and it just goes back to all that fear mongering. Like it's just, and it's so obvious. It's so obvious. Um, Anyway, I suppose these people think they can just do it and we won't notice. So basically, yeah, the agreement comes after the US president's repeated warnings that he would cut them adrift, us, Europe, to face the threat of Russia alone. European Commission President Ursula von der, whatever her name is, says history is being written and leaders are committed to investing more, investing better, and investing faster. That doesn't mean anything. Though what you just said does not mean anything. It's like a Nike ad. Investing more, investing better, investing faster. So what it boils down to, Ursula, is young men dying in fields. So like you can sound like a Nike ad if you want, but you will never be on the front line. You'll never be emerging. And I don't know how the next war, if it happens, I don't think it would look like that. I don't think there will be trenches, but people will die. And it won't be people like you, and it won't be people like Trump. I mean, I know that Trump already shits his pants daily, but he would definitely shit his pants if he had to go anywhere near a front line um, of armed conflict. And we cannot lose sight of the fact that that war is ugly and bloody, and people die, and there's no need for it. So to use these words and say like it's not an advertisement for something great where you're saying investing more, investing better, that's a bad thing, and you should be saying it's a bad thing, and you should be saying that war is not something that we want to go towards. We want to develop peacekeeping, not defense. And of course they'll say, oh, that's how we keep peace, by having bigger bombs. The pledge underscored a sea change in geopolitics spurred on by Mr. Trump, who is determined. Like, why are we even listening to this guy? As I just said, the man wears a nappy. I shouldn't. I mean, look. Okay, I take it back. He's just an idiot. Has undermined 80 years of cooperation based on the understanding that the US would help protect European nations following the Second World War. The big question is, are we preparing for a stronger Europe or a bigger war? Something is definitely afoot. And finally, Irish government challenges homeless asylum seeker ruling. So the Court of Appeal is being urged to overturn a decision that found the Irish government breached asylum seekers' rights by failing to provide accommodation. The state argues that there wasn't enough evidence to say conditions were degrading across the board. So basically, the Minister for Children, Equality, Disability and Integration and Youth, it's a big portfolio, and the Attorney General have brought an appeal against a High Court decision of last August, which found the state's response to the needs of mainly single men who were looking for international protection was inadequate. The court held that there was a failure to provide for the basic needs of some 2,800 newly arrived applicants. The case had been brought by the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, and basically the court found in their favour, and now the government are saying, no, we want to appeal this decision. There was 13 of these men who swore affidavits that they were rough sleeping from time to time, and there was not sufficient evidence. The government are saying that was not sufficient evidence to say that there was a level of degradation for an entire group of people, which amounts to a very serious interference with human dignity. But if you lived in Dublin at the time, you would have seen the tents, you would have seen the men, you would have seen them out living on the streets. It was very evident, and for the government to be fighting this is it's appalling, frankly. We didn't do right by these men, and we continue to not do right by these men, and we continue to encourage right-wing interests to fill that vacuum that the government are not, because they're not dealing with it. So there's a vacuum there, and we are basically allowing the othering of these men and this conversation around unvetted, which is not really a thing. So we need to just, I mean, I wish the government would just like hold their hands up and go, yeah, we did wrong by them. That's it. That's sort of the news headlines. Good good stuff there. I feel sort of cheered now. I'm glad it's not Friday the 13th as well. Right, joining us now in studio is a journalist with 25 years in the game, former football editor of The Times, current columnist for the London Evening Standard, and a regular voice on ESPN, BBC, Sky, and TalkSport. Tony Evans. Tony, welcome to Moth News. How are you?
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you. Thanks for travelling over to Mullingar to our bunker underneath the chip shop.
Do you know what? Chip shops, bunkers, they're rare up my street.
Yeah, I thought who would love to be doing a show from beneath the chip shop in Mullingar in a bunker? I just thought Tony Evans.
But yeah, I mean, one of the favorite pieces I've written is a piece I did about poverty in Derry, which I did over the Celtic chip shop. And so literally mid-sentence, I'd run down and get myself a big, it looked like a shoebox full of fish and chips. It was unbelievable. Two fish, £5.50. You know, in London, you pay, I don't know, you pay 20 quid for it.
Yeah.
And and it does fuel the writing.
You'd pay 20 quid of it and it'd be served on like a small jus of mushy peas. It'd be mushy peas jus, and then served you on a slate.
Yeah.
And then they charge you a lot of money for it.
So it'll be the chippy later.
Yeah, they must be fine. The Catholics, I'd say, were fine then if they had enough money to dole out big portions of fish that were grand.
It's
well, the Catholic fish or Protestant fish? That's my question.
Well, it's it was right, sort of just on the edge of the bog side. So I'd hope they were good Catholic fish. As a Christian Brothers boy myself,
yeah, they were probably stolen from the landlord. They were probably poached fish.
I hope so, because I'm Scouse as well. There's like a bit of theft doesn't go amiss.
They were
all properties theft, isn't it?
All properties theft. Well done, straight in there. So I don't know if there's anything you picked up on in the news or my news briefing there, but like this. Let's just talk a little bit about this. I presume you've been following this sort of nudge towards some kind of. There's a lot of talk about defense and war and Ukraine and Russia, and I don't know if you have a take on that.
Oh, the right are gagging for war, aren't they? They love it, and essentially the poor are going to be picking up the cost of it, aren't they? Because you've got people like Rachel Reeves saying, so we're going to have to cut welfare funds, and we've got to shift the emphasis from people to defense, and you know what? Here's the thing. You remember Theresa May saying there's no magic money tree. There is a magic money tree. Governments can create their own money, and they always do for war. They always do when it suits them. They always do to bail out the banks. They never do it for the poor. And it's the billionaires won't be picking up the cost for this. The poor will, and it's absolutely appalling what's happening, and everyone's going down the same path. And the way politicians talk about running a nation's budget as if it was a household budget, and everyone falls for it, and it's completely different. Governments borrow from themselves, so who do they have to pay back? It's not like on a credit card you got to pay a bank back. It's they can actually create wealth. They just choose not to do, and it's a political choice and an act of political vindictiveness. And when they can whip people up with the idea of war and defense and the fear of Russia. And trust me, I'm not a fan of Putin, I'm not a fan of Russia, but it's being used as a big bogeyman for really depressing purposes. And it will be those on the lowest level of society who will suffer.
I mean, yeah, because we're going back to Reagan and the Cold War, and this kind of everybody was a communist. I mean, even in Ireland, we weren't unaffected by this idea of the commies are coming, and your granny be looking up in the sky thinking that there was a plane about to land with a load of red lads about to slaughter everybody, and it's that fear that makes people okay about spending money on defense, and who wins in the end? Because you're right, it's the poor that will pay, it's the poor that will be taxed, and it's the poor that will die in these wars.
Yeah, and back in the 80s, I mean, I was obviously involved politically with the sort of Liverpool, they say the militant council, and the militant tendency was only a small part of it. But I have to say my sympathies were towards that sort of point of view. And people would say, you're just communist sympathizers, you'd welcome our Russian overlords, one of them. And you'd say to them, look, the Soviet Union is collapsing. It's like it hasn't got the money to support and sustain the type of war you're talking about. We'd say, you say that Soviet tanks will be at the Channel in 72 hours. No, they won't. They haven't got them. And they go, well, yeah. It turns out actually they didn't have them.
Mm,
And it wasn't the fact that we were siding with the Soviet Union. It was just we knew we were being lied to.
mm.
And we were being lied to relentlessly, and we're being lied to relentlessly now.
Yeah, and it's the same. It's the same playbook, isn't it? That's being used again, and we just need to make sure that we notice these things. So, a journalist, you were the chief sports editor in
Now
the
it's the
Times,
football editor.
football editor of the Times, and you're. So when did you finish up there?
It's 10 years now
10
at the
years.
time. So it's so yeah, I was there quite a long time. I was there from I started at the Times around 2000, so I was there 15 years. So an interesting experience, and watching the changes in the industry over the 25 years since I started on in national papers has been a little bit depressing,
Hmm.
a lot depressing.
What happened, do you think, with you and the Times? I mean, I know people. I got in touch with somebody who recommended you. They like enjoy your writing. I've enjoyed your writing since I started reading you. Like, you're a good journalist. You did a good job. What do you think happened? I mean, you're a red Liverpool. You're obviously a communist as well. I'm joking. I'm joking.
Well, yeah, sort of.
So, what do you think? You weren't part of the establishment? Do you think you were like too outspoken to have that role?
Well, not really. I mean, it's quite interesting the way journalism works, because a lot of people think there's especially working for a Rupert Murdoch paper, they think there's like a chain of command that Rupert Murdoch tells you what to do. It's not like that. Where it is, and the way to describe it is, historians have written about the Third Reich in Germany, and they've said, because there's no actually direct proof that Hitler authorized the Holocaust. But what happened is everyone knew what Hitler wanted, so everyone worked towards that, and they called it working towards Hitler. So you didn't need to issue these sort of these diktats. People would just do it normally because they thought it, and that's what happens in these papers. People work towards Murdoch rather than being expressly told.
It wasn't like Murdoch came down and said, "Here, you, Tony, want to have a word with you? I don't want you talking like this in the paper anymore."
Yeah, in fact, I never once got told what to write, and they never once took anything I wrote out of the paper, which was, I think that was more to do with the editors than, and the reason I left is that they appointed a new editor who was a Hillsborough denier, hated Scousers because I'd looked up the stuff he'd written. He covered the so-called militant years in Liverpool, and at the first he had breakfast for staff. And so I went to the first one. I was invited to the first one. No one had sit next to him. They were all scared of him. So I just went and sat down. I'm not scared of him. But like sort of about a third of the way through it, he said, apropos of nothing, I was talking to my good friend Kelvin. And I was like, all right, exit strategy coming. And then sure enough, after I'd left, when the results of the inquest come through, the Times didn't put it on the front page. And I was lucky because I had editors. Because when I started working for the Times, my main purpose was to get information about Hillsborough into the paper. And the first two editors I worked under not only allowed that, but the second one was very sympathetic to, he talked to me about him, very sympathetic to us. And, we actually got it on the front page after the Hillsborough Independent panel. But once I got, a Hillsborough denier and a friend of Kelvin Mackenzie, and I knew I didn't have long for the world. So,
that was it. It's time to go.
Yeah, it's.
And where do you think? I mean, for you, where do you think now? I mean, that was a few years ago, but now what's the state of journalism like? Because if someone like you is thinking, this is like, I can't work here anymore because I won't be able to speak the truth, or I won't be able to talk about, I won't be able to give the facts around what's actually happened about something like Hillsborough. And as you said, it wasn't on the front page when, like, it was massive news. where how do you think it's gone further? Do you think it's gotten worse? Do you think it's where do you think we're at now?
Well, I think there's still a lot of very, very good journalists around. I think, unfortunately, that many of them, most of them, are from the middle classes and upwards. It's not an area where there's lots of, even though you're seeing more people from minority backgrounds, and now working class people involved. There's not that many from. Even people from ethnic minorities tend to be more middle class. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And
it's because it's not a race thing. It's
yeah,
generally a class thing, isn't it?
yeah, definitely. It's so you're never going to get like a left wing viewpoint, I don't think. But what is really bad and what's happened over the past 2 decades is the pay rates have gone down,
Mm,
but also the internet has sort of killed the business. So you get lots of young people who think the journalists, and what they do, they sit in an office and they rewrite copy.
mm,
Um, and one of the main things throughout my career I thought was really important was contacts. So I'd go out and I'd have a drink with people, I'd talk to them. So it's you build up relationships with them, because when you've got relationships, people give you stories. Um, whether it's football or in politics, and you don't, well, people are not paid well enough. They don't get the expenses to go out. And also people think that rewriting copy, someone else's copy, is journalism. And it astounds me as well that no one seems to communicate among the young people by speaking on the phone or, face to face. It's all text and emails. And I'm a bit like, to do the job properly, you've really got to, like I say, build relationships and find people who will tell you things that the public doesn't know.
mm.
And it seems there's less of that going on than ever. And I hope I'm wrong on that, but it just feels that as investigative journalism is a dying art.
Mm. And I mean, you're talking about investigative journalism, and people always think about these like big, these big case studies that go on for months. And you think about like American, I don't know what was the Boston Globe that broke the Catholic Catholic
Yeah,
Church abuse stories, stuff like that. But in fact, it's actually just the day to day going out and meeting people, having contacts, getting some copy sent in or a press release or something, going, that doesn't really sound right, because the characters
mm,
involved. And it is something that we want to do here on Moth, is like to give people the news between the lines, the bits they leave out, the bits they leave to the
yeah,
last paragraph, so that they know that the headline is deceiving if you actually read down, and to encourage people to do that. It's really important.
yeah. Investigative journalism is expensive
Mm.
because it takes a long time. It's not going to happen quickly. It's I've talked to young journalists who are expected to write 3 or 4 pieces a day more.
Mm.
They have it's almost like a factory. They're turning
Yeah.
people over. People what they call it journalism, don't they? But
Journalism, I
yeah.
like it.
What you need is time. It's you need time, because there are big issues and big stories that the public should know about. I mean, you look at the post office scandal,
Yeah.
and people were working on that for years and years and years. The government were ignoring it. The politicians just wanted to put it on the back burner, but people continued to dig and to not least obviously the victims of it, but they were helped by it. One of the computer magazines with the national press should have been all over that
It was
right
like
from the beginning.
a
Yeah,
computer magazine that
yeah,
caught,
yeah,
because it was actually the computer system that was the problem, and not
yeah,
the people who ended up in prison, and some of them died by suicide.
yeah,
Actually, it was down to the software that the government didn't want to admit that they made a mistake.
yeah, and it's insane because I,
The
uh,
investigative journalism was being done by a computer magazine.
yeah, and it should have been done by the national press
It's
again.
it's like NME or Hot Press in Ireland, or Select, or one of these magazines, doing a whole thing on uh, there was the famous disco in Ireland in the 70s,
Yeah,
where lots of people died. I mean, it's as if they broke the story and kept at it.
yeah, and there are so many areas in British society, not least islands, particularly obviously the 6 counties, where people have such a warped view of it in this country, and that's a massive failure of journalism. Because you're talking about Irish generals saying, we've got to work with the British Army, and you're like, oh, okay. Well, actually, if you if you're going to do it, they did for years and years and years.
Mm.
And when you consider that the British Army were actually colluding with loyalist paramilitaries, that makes a very, very ugly circle.
Yeah.
And so but all that needs to be exposed, because what people and an ex special forces soldier said to me when I was talking to him. He said most people walk around in a dream. They don't realize that there are bad people doing bad things out there.
Mm.
And what journalism should be doing is exposing the bad people doing bad things.
Yeah, and it's not happening anymore.
Well,
so it sort of suits, I suppose. Maybe it suits a certain section of society, people who talk about, like, increasing spending on defense, people who promote fear. It suits them that young journalists are coming through and they're being kept busy by being asked to churn out articles. Also, you need to make a video. Also, you need to do some social media on that. Also, so I suppose it suits that there's nobody doing proper. They don't have time, and they probably have a big mortgage and maybe young kids, and they don't have time, and they're afraid to push back.
No time, little pay, and the cult of celebrity is massive. Very few people. Well, I mean, let's be honest. What sells papers is not serious big investigations. So they know that, it's one of the interesting things is the Times used to put a picture of the royal family on the front all the time, especially one of the women in the royal family. I'd have the right ump over it, it's like, and then someone said to me, he said, the sales go up every time they put. So the British want this like inane sort of soap opera on the front, and that's what sells papers. But there's got to be more about being a journalist than merely selling papers. There's got to be, you've got to believe, to do it properly, I think, that it's a bit of a vocation. It's a lifestyle choice. It's a vocation. And you've got to try and expose. And I mean, expose these people who don't want their secrets exposed. And yeah, it might be something daft, like, a football club and the way they're being run and the way they're shafting the fans. Well, it might be at government level, but you've got to have some sort of belief that you're doing something for the good of the world. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah. What is the point? I mean, I suppose it's to go in and say, well, I went to university, so to be a journalist, and now I'm being a journalist, and is that good enough? And I think everybody gets to a certain point where they become disillusioned, and either they'll do something about it and change the way they work, or they won't, because it's just too difficult. So speaking of this idea of the Irish government working with the British to I don't know, to build up defences, to build up arms, we've done that. You've been putting out the chapters of this book you wrote called Collusion. It's something I'm very interested in. I very recently, I think I might have read the book back in the day, but a podcast came out called Steak Knife, which is excellent. But this idea of collusion in Northern Ireland, and I started reading your book. That you have your own Substack. People can find Tony Evans' Substack and read your stuff, and I'm sure it's linked to a Patreon account. But it starts off with is the guy's name the Beast?
Yes.
So the Beast turns up. He meets an old friend in a pub, and he's like, "Can I? Is that, that romper room you have? Is that available? And he's like, "Yeah, we can use it. Who are you? Who are you punishing, or what's going on?" And he's like, "Oh no, just don't worry about it. Just can you open it up for me?" And when he opens it up, it turns out it's the guy. He's the guy that he's going to bring into the romper room and hold there for a long, arduous, and painful death. It's a fascinating opening.
Yeah, well, it's based on something that happened to me. It's I was in that very pub, and I'd gone over to speak to before the pandemic, to speak to the Ballymurphy families. I was planning a piece on them, which actually never ever saw the light of day, because they put back the they put back the inquiry, and and then the pandemic hit. But I was in the, I went to the toilet, and there's a guy there, and he said to me, he said, "Do you want any Charlie?" And I'm like, "Nah, mate, you know, I'm just, you know." And he's like, "I can get you Charlie because I'm a boss." And he turned around and stood like right. And so I was like, "Okay." He goes, "You don't think I'm a boss?" He goes, "You think I'm too young to be a boss?" So I'm all right in these situations. I've been in confrontational situations before. I said, nah. So I can see like, you know, you've got a bit of authority by you, an air of authority. He was, "Oh, okay, you like that." So anyway, went back and I said, you know, for God's sake, you know, someone doing the party piece for me.
Yeah.
You know, one of them. Next thing, like this fella appears with a pint for me and puts it on the table and goes, "That's from the boss." So I'm like, "Oh, okay. Yeah, okay." So I drank it. And then, so before I was about to go, I went back to the toilet like an idiot, and he was in there again. He saw me, and his eyes were like, "Ooh," you know, obviously been taking his own coke, and he freaked out and like legs it. So I said, "Just got out of there." I went back and I thought, so I started Googling, you know, leadership, UDA, young leaders, UDA, you know, and all that. Like, eventually, after about 3 or 4 hours, I come up with a Twitter page. I've missed a really important point. He has a huge scar down his face. I've come up with this Twitter page, and like a guy who's just posting loyalist stuff all the time, you know. So I looked at it and like I saw a picture of him. So I got his name off there and Google started researching again. It turns out that he'd been in jail and he'd been walking around town with a knife, saying he was going to stab Teagues. And he'd been in the parachute regiments. Haven't they all? Haven't they all? And anyway, so needless to say, like I followed the thing through, and what he'd done, he got this guy being in prison with a house. He says, "You can live there. There's packages coming. Deliver them to me." Obviously, the fella told not to open them. Eventually, does. It's coke, so we start taking his slice of it. So they go round and the spray him, which I used in the booth with an aerosol, and they light it now on his genitals and fused his genitals. And but by the time they got to court, he told the police it was a UDA punishment attack. By the time they got to court, it was a drunken jape gone wrong, you know. And it's but anyway, so I was like, and there's loads of things through my career in journalism. I you know, I've been to places that most people wouldn't go, you know, Ukraine. You know, I was in Donetsk in 2011, and it freaked me out, moodier than Belfast. And so I come back to my wife and said, "There's going to be war there. It's going to be war." And you know, sort of, and again, you know, I was there for football. I was there as part of a UEFA tour a year before the Euros, so there wasn't lots of football fans in town. You know, you see it in
you see in a different light. Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, I spent a lot of time going around talking to people, and it piqued me interest, and I followed it from there. So I included stuff from that, and then I wrote just before the pandemic quite a bit about Northern Ireland, because the British know nothing about Northern Ireland. You know, we saw like what was it only this week? There was someone on social media thinking that the Dublin and
Monaghan
bombings were
by the IRA.
By the IRA, and you think, what?
He was an Irish
He was an Irishman as well.
Yeah.
So if you think that's stupid, the British are like 10 times. So you know, and I become friendly with Stephen Travers from the Miami Show Band. And through that, you get a sense of the collusion, and it's I've spoken to a lot of people about it, and it's horrifying what people did to civilians in Britain's name.
Yeah,
and you know, it's.
But once again, we'll see working class, poor people suffering to keep the visage, or the, you know, what the British were actually doing in Northern Ireland, how they were operating. You know, they would say they went over there to keep the peace between the Protestants and the Catholics, which was totally a made up thing, and how they were, you know, using these terrorist groups, the UDA. They were, you know, they were collusion, whatever, and this was all being orchestrated. And Steak Knife is a massive example of somebody who was in the IRA for many years, one of the top guys, and was carrying out punishment meetings to make sure people were dying. Young Irishmen were dying, mostly Irishmen and women were dying and being killed to make sure that no one suspected him of being the tout, as they say, or the guy who was there a plant by the British Army. So it's utterly fascinating. If you think you know what happened in Northern Ireland, and if you think you know who the bad guys are, you're absolutely wrong.
Yeah.
We will talk more about that, but this book Collusion that you've written, it's really good, and it's if you follow Tony on X, you can see he's been posting the chapters every week. I think every Thursday. It's really good of you. Thank you very much. And we will talk to you. But right now we have to go to Philip because he's waiting patiently by. So our chief reporter Philip O'Connor spoke to Senator Tom Clonan about the issue of Ireland's neutrality. We're getting back to this again. He started by asking him if we have the video there. Philip, you just have to bear with us there for Philip for a moment there, Philip. He started by asking who is pushing this whole conversation.
Is it, NATO members? Is it arms manufacturers? Who is sort of pushing this to the top of the agenda, do you think?
I don't know. I think you'd have to ask so there's some very high profile people who are in our public discourse who constantly reiterate these positions. And I think that question should be addressed to them. I mean, I wouldn't like to speculate on it. I don't know why it is the case, but it certainly is. I mean, it's very noticeable in our public discourse that this subject, I mean, if you do even a simple content analysis and look back at, like, let's say, print media, do a search of their online, you can see how many opinion pieces and features have been written. It's definitely, it has a lot of momentum. It's a very dynamic debate. And frankly, I don't have a problem with NATO. I think NATO is a legitimate, valid and valuable defence partnership that have they made mistakes? Yeah, absolutely, they've made mistakes. But I still think it's a valid and legitimate military alliance. I don't think, we wouldn't be admitted to NATO because we just don't meet the bare minimum requirements for entry, the entry criteria. But also, I don't think there's any value for Ireland at the moment, politically, strategically, diplomatically, to joining NATO just now. That could change. If the threat scenario or the threat environment changes significantly, that might change. But at the moment, there'd be no benefit for Ireland. So I think a lot of the kind of the myths I was talking about earlier, people approve of our neutrality, that's not true. We need to join the European army. I don't think that it would either be useful or a good thing. I think that, I think the United States will remain, I hope, the anchor tenant of NATO in Europe. I think the Americans would be very uncomfortable if the Europeans went it alone and formed some kind of a European army dominated by France and Germany. I think the Americans would not be happy with that because it would replicate and duplicate a lot of the functions of NATO. They would see it as an unnecessary spend, and they would also see it as something that they can't control. So I think Vice President Vance was very clear when he said, we want European member states who are NATO members to spend more on their defence. But they weren't suggesting that we should form our own European army. So a lot of these positions are being reiterated and rehearsed in our public domain without any evidence.
There you go. I don't know what you're going to ask him next. I'm sure it's fascinating. You can listen to the rest of that and find out what Philip was going to ask him next. He started with, is it? Is it? Maybe it was about his after. I'm not sure. So Philip, that's available as a podcast. It's the Mothcast. It's Mothcast Unvetted, and Philip interviews interesting people about things that are going on and trying to get to the part of the story that you haven't heard about and haven't told you about. We get the news in between the lines. Philip, what was your major takeaway from your conversation with Tom?
Yeah, it was very interesting, Keith, because when you talk to somebody like Senator Tom Clonan, you're talking to somebody who has served in the Irish Army. He has been a major there. He has been to the Middle East. He has been to Bosnia. He has been to conflict. He has seen the bodies on the battlefield. He has researched deeply into the Irish Army, not least the way female members of the forces were treated. He has done all sorts of stuff in terms of communication, that as well. He's been a lecturer in Trinity College. And now, of course, he's sitting in the House in Shannon. So I got a completely different perspective from him, because what we're seeing in the sort of public discourse now, if you read the opinion, the op-eds in the Irish Times or the Independent or the Examiner or the Business Post or whatever, there's an awful lot of, we have to give up neutrality, we have to be the big boys, we have to grow up and that kind of thing. And he sort of deals with all those points very succinctly. And Tom would be the first to say that the Irish Army and the Irish Armed Forces and the Navy and the Air Corps have been under-resourced for far too many years. All you have to do is ask the soldiers who've been so underpaid for so many years. We know we don't have the equipment. We know we don't have the planes to defend ourselves. But what do you want to do, right? So one of the things about what Tom was saying was, how do we go about defending ourselves in the 21st century? Is Ireland likely to be invaded? You know, are we likely to sort of wake up? We often talk about the Swedish island of Gotland here. Of course, I'm speaking to you again from Stockholm, and you wake up with the Russians in your garden kind of thing. Is that going to happen to Ireland? Maybe not. So what you're talking about is something completely different. One of the things we've seen in recent weeks is the attacking of undersea cables, undersea pipelines, that kind of thing. That might be what Ireland needs. Do you need bombs for that? Do you need bullets for that? Maybe not, but you do need to invest in different things. And to go back to the point that you made about JD Vance there, JD Vance wants people spending money. And I think that's an absolutely key part of the discussion that we need to focus on. Why does the American government want people spending money? Because they want you to buy from American manufacturers. It's the same thing again here in Sweden. Sweden does a great job of marketing itself abroad, but they sell weapons technology and they sell tanks and they sell all sorts of Jazz Gripen airplanes and that kind of thing. And they do a great job of keeping that quiet, and they make an awful lot of money out of it. But as in your conversation there with Tony, Keith, it's unfortunate I have to take part in this discussion. I was so enjoying listening to the two of you talking about everything there. But it is that thing, if it comes down to, when it comes down to it, when are we going to put often working class men and women in the firing line? When are we going to ask them to make the ultimate sacrifice? And who bears the responsibility for that? Who will take responsibility for when those young people come back in boxes? Because that is what war is.
Yeah. And once again, like this has been a huge discussion that we've had around spending more on defense. And I can't really remember it being taken as seriously when the soldiers came out and said, can we be paid more, because literally we don't have enough money to pay our bills and our children are hungry. So once again, we see how the poor people, the lower socioeconomic groups are treated, and then when suddenly they're like, oh no, we might be able to find a bit of money for a few helicopters and some bombs and stuff if we have to defend ourselves. Well, if you want to spend more on defense, we'll spend it paying the people who are going out there as peacekeepers to the likes of the Lebanon and wherever they've been down through the years, famously are brilliant peacekeeping forces, and they've done a great job everywhere they've gone. Sometimes we've lost men out there, as peacekeepers, unfortunately. Pay them more, make sure they're comfortable, and like if you look at, I live near the Curragh in Ireland. If you look at the buildings, if you look at the equipment they're using, if you look at what they have to do day to day, they should be given medals, some kind of medals, for just keeping going, for for staying interested, because nobody seems to care about them. And now we're talking about spending money on bombs so that JD Vance and his pals can build another swimming pool.
Do you know what, Keith? You raise a very interesting point there. And I think there's two things that we need to look at in it, right? One is that warfare in the 21st century does not look like it did in 1914. There are no longer any trenches. There are no longer men going over the top, as they famously did in the last episode of Blackadder, which is one of the most powerful pieces of television that you could ever see when it comes to dealing with this subject. But one of the things that Ireland could do, for instance, is in the area of cybersecurity. We have a very well-educated English-speaking workforce that could make a major contribution to a European army or to a NATO if it comes to that. But we don't talk about those things, because what we need is this cognitive dissonance, right? We need to have this idea that we are brave, we are willing to put our bodies and our young people on the line, right? But as I've often said, I think I said it in a discussion with Lucinda Creighton, the former Fine Gael politician who went on to form some batshit party called Renua. And I remember asking her online once, right? I think she has 3 children. And I asked her, Lucinda, which of them will you be sending to war if it comes to that? Because if you're going to ask me to send my daughters into war, and if she's going to ask you, Keith, to send send your son into war, then I want to know which one of her sons or daughters that she's going to send to do that. And people say to me, oh, you're trying to shut down debate with that question. No, I'm asking you a question that you cannot answer because you are not prepared to do that. But you expect you and me and Keith Walsh and the children of Tony Evans and the children of Alan and Neve to do that kind of thing. So if you're not prepared to do that yourself, don't come looking for me to do it. And the other thing that I'd love to bring up on this show, right? And again, we talk about reading between the lines and looking behind these stories, right? Why aren't we talking about becoming a superpower of peacemakers and of peacekeepers rather than of warmongers? We are known throughout the world. And again, Tom Clonan says it in the interview. I would strongly suggest that anybody with an interest in neutrality go listen to that conversation, not to hear me talk, but to hear Tom. Tom says that in all his years as a security analyst for the Irish Times, in the Irish Army, in these forces, and being part of various European delegations, nobody ever said to him that they looked down on Ireland for being neutral. Nobody ever said to him that they looked down on Ireland for the stance that it took in being non-aligned, right? In fact, the opposite is true. They looked up to Ireland, and people in the Middle East and in Israel too, somewhat begrudgingly, look up to Ireland because of how well they have trodden the fine line in their peacekeeping missions there, in Serbia, in Africa, in Myanmar, all over the world they have done these things, Keith. And yet we don't look at where our strength is. We don't look to reinforce that, to give those people, as you correctly mentioned, who served in the Lebanon. I mean, you want to see some of the conditions that they've been in. I know musicians, friends who've been out there to entertain them on occasions, and it's a terrible lifestyle altogether. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about spending $2 billion on this diffuse idea of, oh, we need a couple of fighter planes. They are not, as Mike Tyson famously said, right? You know, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? If we get 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 jets, they ain't going to last, right? If Vladimir comes for us, or if Donald Trump comes for us, or if Keir Starmer comes for us, those things are going to be over before they get off the ground. So if we want to be the adults in the room, if we want to have a grown-up discussion about it, I'm all for it, right? But do not take peace off the table, because peace should be the only thing that is on the table in these discussions.
Yeah, you're dead right. You obviously missed the headline that we're the laughing stock of the world, or neutrality. Everyone's laughing at us. It's a joke.
I mean, I actually didn't think that was a headline, because that headline has been in every Irish newspaper in the last few weeks and website and that kind of thing. And I think, again, you know, and it's absolutely, I have to say, what a privilege it is for us to have Tony on this show and to articulate as well as he does, remembering things like, you know, the militant left in Liverpool, remembering Hillsborough. And what he is speaking to there a lot of the time, and indeed in his books as well, is how the media works. And what was fascinating there was how we talked about how working class people don't get in there. It's often middle class people. And journalism is no longer a trade as it was when Tony and I and yourself started. It's now a profession, right? It's there for people who can afford to do a year or 2 or 3 years of unpaid internships, and then maybe their dad will get them a job on a newspaper. We don't get this working class perspective anymore. And the easiest way to get, you don't have to sort of tell Tony what to write, because, you know, if you bring in somebody who thinks the same way as you do, you don't have to teach them. In the same way that when you sit down for lunch at some club in London, you don't have to tell them which knife and fork to use, Keith. They know, because that's the way they were brought up. They have the same values as you. And that's why we get this sort of this monocultural media that we're getting. And that's why I'm so delighted to be on this podcast and on this broadcast with you every week, because that's not what we do. Our purpose, if you like, is to turn these things upside down and go, hang on a second, that smells really bad and it doesn't make any sense. And as I say, that is why, I mean, I can't hype Tony up enough. He's just a fantastic journalist, and I followed his work for many, many years. It's great to have him here.
Oh, well, thank you. It's a very humble, and all you can do is do your best. And the thing is, we need to educate people. We need to tell people that there are deeper stories that affect their lives. And you know, one of the things about Hillsborough, and I you know, the abuse I get on social media about it, but you say to people, "I'm not doing it for me. That ship sailed. I'm not doing it for the families. None of us are getting justice. What we're doing it for is so it doesn't happen to you. So that when your family, your friends go to a public event, then and something happens that runs out of control, they're not demonized, they're not blamed. You know what's appalling? And people, I think I'm the only one in the media who's picked up on it. At least 2 of the victims of the Manchester bombing in 2017 died from the same institutional problems as at Hillsborough. And you're like, what have we been doing all these years? These were one was I think a 9-year-old, and the other was in his 20s, and they died for the same failures as we saw in Sheffield in 1989. And that tells me that the media and as well as the government and as well as the authorities haven't done enough.
Yeah, I mean, no, the thing that we're trying to do here on Moth, and it's very simple, is to create an Ireland, a utopian Ireland. But we're looking at fairness and we're looking at equality for everybody. We don't care when they moved here. We don't care how they got here. We don't care whether they grew up here and whether they're from Cork, whether Cork, maybe. We don't care if they're from Cork. We don't care if they're from Dublin. We don't care which county they come from. And even if they come from the 33rd county of Liverpool, we want fairness and we want equality, and that's what we're about, and that's all we're asking for. And there's no fairness and there's no equality in war. None of the people talking about spending more money on defence are ever going to, as you said, stand themselves and put themselves in a position where they could be shot or to watch their pals being shot, or they're not going to have to send their children as well. So, I mean, we talk about fairness, we talk about equality. That's what we have to be looking at. And it comes back to Hillsborough. It comes back to people like you, Philip. That's why you live in Sweden, because you're a troublemaker. And it's people like Tony who's labeled a red or a commie or whatever, because he's a troublemaker, because he's saying, and that's what happens. You speak out and then you're called a troublemaker. And people, and it's unfortunate, because you talk about education. We do need to educate people, because then the public want to see, a nice picture of the Queen on the front of the paper, and they don't want to, they want to listen to people like Tony who are just like, commies and just clearly insane, but it's about fighting for our rights, and we have lots of examples of it in Ireland as well, of Hillsborough, and as you said, like, why is all of the effort and all of the work and all of the money going into, say, keeping something like Hillsborough quiet, and what actually went on, keeping things quiet, keeping people down, keeping like troublemakers? No, we're doing government stuff over here. We don't really need to hear about what happened to your son or your child or your daughter. And actually we need, we need your son or your daughter or your child, because we're going to war. But then afterwards we won't care about them when they're veterans either as well. We just leave them on the streets, and then we'll call them crazy people, and then we'll say, oh yeah, they're on drugs, this is what we do as a society. This is what we do. And then when we talk about people who won't go to war or won't send their children to war, and we call them cowards, and we say you have to be brave, and then we wear a poppy, and then we say how brave they were. And all of the time, I don't have. You look at that James McLean, and he doesn't wear the poppy, and I think that's amazing, because the poppy for me, and the wearing of the poppy, we all want to remember people who went, young men who went and died, because that was so sad, and that was a terrible thing, a needless death. It should never have happened. But what we need to really focus on in those days is who sent them there, and what are they doing, and what are they doing now, and focus on what an atrocious thing it was they did to young people, to send them out to die, to do what, and follow the thread. And we need to do that now more than ever. Follow the thread, find out why these people are being sent to die, and who it is, and how they were looked after when they came home the last time, the ones that were lucky enough to come home, and how their families were looked after, because they were ignored. Then there was war, they were needed. After the war, they were either dead or they were going back to being ignored, and that's the truth.
One of the interesting things about America, where much of this is coming from, both the uncertainty, but also this desire for us to spend money on American weapons and systems and that kind of thing, Keith. And I remember being in the Boston Garden it was not too many years ago, it was only about 4 or 5 years ago. And they have a thing called Hero Among Us at Boston Celtics games, where they bring out a local person who's done good in the community. And then, everybody stands up and applauds, and they get a jersey or whatever. And this particular night, it was a combat surgeon who was there. And the man came out and, he performed X amount of operations during X amount of tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan, and let us all stand up and cheer our hero among us. And I remember leaving the stadium that night, and actually during the break I was going out to get some water, and I just saw there was so many people around this combat surgeon, and they were taking photographs with him. Everybody's taking selfies with this guy. And I left and I walked out of the Boston Garden in the city center in Boston, and I don't know how many veterans I stepped over on the way back to the hotel. And this is the cognitive dissonance, and you will see it on the streets of Liverpool and on the streets of London, and indeed on the streets of Dublin in some cases. If you go back long enough, you would have seen these things. You would have seen people who were told that you're doing this great service to your country, and who were chewed up and who were spat out, not even before the war was over in most cases. And again, I think that's the grown-up discussion we need to have, because nobody is ever asking if they can make a sacrifice themselves. They are always asking that others make that sacrifice for them. And whereas peace benefits everybody, war happens to hit the poorest and the working class the hardest. And that, like, as I say, if you want to have these discussions, I am more than happy to have these discussions with anybody. But let's be honest about it. There is no glory in this, right? There is no glory in the war in Ukraine or the war in Gaza or the genocide in Gaza or anywhere else in the world. War is not a glorious thing. It's a thing to get over as quickly as you possibly can and try and move on as humanity. And anybody selling you anything else is selling you snake oil.
Mm-hmm. And what's really interesting is you see all these veterans come out, and you see so many living on the streets, and the government don't do anything to help them. They don't, they've cut back the programs for things like post-traumatic stress syndrome and alcoholism amongst ex-soldiers. But then the right will they'll let them sleep on the streets, but then they'll roll them out and use them as a stick to beat immigrants with, and say, why are we putting immigrants in hotels when our own veterans are on the streets? And you're like, well, whoa, it's not an either or. It's and the truth is, the wealthy and the right don't really care about soldiers or veterans. They want to use them in battle, and they want to use them as political footballs later on, but they don't care enough to make sure they get well-being and they get treated well after the service is over.
Yeah, and that's what we're looking at. That's what we're talking about. So we talk about defense, we can talk about money, we can talk about these arbitrary things like neutrality, or aligning ourselves with Britain or France, whatever, to buy more weapons to defend ourselves. Let's just talk about the reality of young people going out to needlessly die, and where they're coming from and how they're looked after beforehand. They're ignored beforehand, then they're sent to war, and then they're ignored after. And it is that thing of like alcoholism to deal with PTSD, or these people are merely finding medication that they're not being given to deal with being alive, and that is the thing that's keeping them alive. It's not a bad thing that they're doing. They've actually found a solution, and we have a very warped sense of these people, and we need to change them. Where's the humanity? So we really need to look at, as Philip, as you said, the neutrality is a strength. It's an amazing what we do, and let's not kid ourselves and be kidded into going down this. I just don't. As you said, look, listen to the podcast. It's very interesting. Like who is driving this to the top of the agenda? It's scary. It's warmongering, and we need to be very aware of that. I mean, the other thing, Philip, then is like obviously, the EU are saying, like, they're moving at speed, and they're going to do it really fast, and like they're just they're sleepwalking the whole of, I don't have anything more to say about it. Let's just move on to something flippant and nonsensical, and talk about our dick of the week now. Philip, this is unfair, right? Because I told Tony he'd need to pick a dick of the week. I will pick a dick of the week, and you sent a photograph, and I just think we don't have photographs, and I think that's an unfair advantage. But I'm gonna let it slide this time. So let's look at the photograph, and then you can explain who your dick of the week is.
So basically what you're saying there is, Keith, that I have won the Dick of the Week arms race this week, and I'm very happy to have done it. I have invested my time and my energies in it.
No, you prepared properly.
But you know what? The job was done for me, Tony. And wait till you hear the story behind this particular photograph, right? So the man standing on the left is a man named Mats Persson, and he is my candidate for Dick of the Week this week. And if he doesn't win, I will probably resign from this show, right? Because by God, does he deserve it, right? The picture that you're looking at there was taken about 10 minutes from my house. Now, Mats isn't just your ordinary Swedish citizen. He's the Minister for Employment and Integration in this country, right? He's standing on a balcony, as I say, about 10 minutes from my house, in what would be an area that many immigrants live in. People from Somalia, people from Chile, people from Kurdistan and from Turkey. And Mats is standing there because once upon a time there was a few gangs knocking around, lads who would shoot one another over the drug trade and that kind of thing. You can think of places in Liverpool, I'm sure, Keith, Tony. We can think of places in Dublin and in Galway and in Cork and places where that would happen, right? Mats is under absolutely no threat whatsoever, right? But here he is cosplaying 10 minutes from my house because he wants to look tough, right? And he looks like a dickhead. So he turned up there. The man standing to the right of him there is a man named Martin Melin. And Martin is actually a former police officer. So I got in touch with him because of this, because they put it out on the Liberal Party's social media feed. And I said, okay, so why on earth is he wearing that vest? And they went, oh, so there was some sort of security things that, but they didn't feel under any threat whatsoever. And I said, well, surely if there was some sort of security thing going on, wouldn't Martin Melin be wearing a bulletproof vest as well? Or are you people just yanking my fucking chain here, right? Mm-hmm. And then, of course, they stopped coming back. Journalists, when we ask questions, we don't always expect answers, as Tony will well know. And they didn't come back to me. And I was asking, okay, what does it say about the Sweden that this guy is running if he has to wear the bulletproof vest to work, right? One of the parties of law and order and that kind of thing. And, of course, I got a deafening silence. The truth is, lads, there's absolutely no need for that man to be wearing the bulletproof vest. And to prove it, on Saturday night, I've been working a bit with football and cross-country skiing. I cover a lot of sports as well, which is why I know Tony's work so well. And I wanted to go and eat, and my wife had already eaten, and she said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know, I don't really know what I want. And then I thought, I'm going to put my jacket on and I'm going to walk across the green area and I'm going to go to pretty much where Matt's is standing there, and I'm going to have me dinner there. And it was the first day of Ramadan. Last Saturday was the first fasting day of Ramadan. So, the sun had gone down. There was lots of people out there, and they looked at me as I went over there, the old white guy with the beard. I looked like Santa Claus on holiday. And they sort of looked at me, and I looked at them, and I nodded to them, and they smiled at me, and we just got on with it. I went and I had me dinner in an African restaurant there. I had a lovely kebab, and I went home. No need for a bulletproof vest. In fact, I didn't see any. And the other thing is that the only people who wear bulletproof vests in our area these days are criminals. I wonder if Matt's trying to tell us something. And if he's not, I still think that he is very much a deserving winner of our award this week on the Dick of the Week.
Well, you see what he's done here, Tony. He not only has come in with a picture. That's not preparation. That's just like, just trying to play the odds or whatever. I don't know what he's doing. He's play acting. You can take the photograph down there. Philip's seen it enough.
I think in the theme of the show, he's gone nuclear on us. I don't see how we can rearm and fight back, frankly.
He spent too much money
white flag up, surrender. We welcome our expat Irish Swedish overlords.
I have to say, Tony, it's very seldom. People do dumb things in the media all the time, as you well know, especially when you're living in Liverpool and, you'll see things in the newspapers and you just go, oh, God. But this is one of those things that just tipped me over the edge because when COVID happened back a few years ago, it seems like a long time ago, but it's 5 years ago now since COVID happened. And I walked past a hair salon, it's basically a barber shop there, right? And there's a man named Zeki who owned that place. And I remember him telling me that his father passed away in COVID. And there's an awful lot of families there whereby, the way in the Irish families in Liverpool, we would live 6, 7, 8, 10 to a house kind of thing, Swedish families don't do that. People tend to live on their own or in pairs or that. The kids grow up and they move out literally the day after they graduate from high school. But families from Kurdistan and from Somalia, they tend to live together for a long time. And grandparents tend to live there as well, which of course was terrible during COVID. Now, the people who live there, the people who live on that balcony where Matt's Passion is standing in his bulletproof vest, they're bus drivers and they're taxi drivers. So in the very beginning, when we didn't understand that COVID was an airborne disease, they were driving people around the place. And in fact, I spoke to one taxi driver who got COVID because he was bringing people home from a skiing holiday in the Italian Alps. They had caught COVID there. They gave it to him, and that transferred then to his family, one of whom died from it, right? And this, when we talk about class and when we talk about how people are perceived and how they're painted up in the media, that's why I reacted so strongly to this in particular, And in fairness, the only thing I could have done was taking the picture myself. But fortunately, that's the only decent thing Matt's did, was to give me the ammunition that I needed to bring to this arms race today.
Look, Tony, he's given us. We've run out of time. We don't even have time to propose our dicks of the week. So we just have to declare him the winner. So I mean, talk to him. So, I'll leave the last word to you, Tony.
Oh no, I think you've got it nailed on there, and I think that's brilliant work, Philip. And yes, I think people who are not listening to you and not following you, I think they're insane.
By the way, before we go, Keith, we have to note that Tony is not just a brilliant journalist and a brilliant author. He was also the bass player in the band The Farm, if I remember rightly, who's altogether now was absolutely... Sorry, trombone. It was trombone.
Yeah.
Where did I get
We're going to play out with all together now, but we don't have time.
Oh, that's unfortunate. One of the greatest anti-war songs of all time. And I actually owe you royalties from that, mate. So the next time I see you, I've got a tenner here because there's a DJ in Greece in 1991 and I played it every single night about 3 times. So I owe you a few points for that, pal.
Tony, thank you very much for joining us. I didn't get to talk about your book, Two Tribes, which is available to buy. Two Tribes, which is, very briefly, if you could just give us a little
Oh, it's about the year after Heysel, and it's about how Liverpool was demonized. It's about the city council. It's about the backdrop of the politics, but basically how Liverpool and Everton saved football. When it was at its lowest peak. Liverpool were responsible for it being at its lowest peak, of course, but you know how they save football. It's loads of politics, loads of football, loads of good stories.
Yeah. But we say, you know, football is important to politics. Well, we see the way the Celtic fans have handled themselves when it comes to Palestine. I know Liverpool are a very sort of similar club as well. So we need spaces like that in football is very important, and I know Philip will agree. Philip, you've won. Well done. We have to go. Thank you very much, Philip. Tony, there's so much more we could have talked about. I feel like we didn't have enough time, but we will get you back on again if you're happy to come on.
I know anytime.
Lots more to talk about. Thank you very much for watching, and don't forget the podcasts are available. The Mothcast is called. If actually I need to edit your last one, Philip. I'm really sorry. Didn't get time because I was editing that photograph. But do get in touch if you have any stories that you'd like us to investigate. We're on X at mothnews_, Instagram moth_news. If there's something we should investigate, drop us a message and we will look into it and we'll do our best. And maybe you can come on here and tell your story. Thanks, Philip. Thanks, Tony. Thanks very much. And have a good day. And remember, war is bad, yeah? Real bad.